Blessings. Welcome to today's Law Enforcement Daily Devotional. Today we're in Jeremiah, and we started our read in chapter 49, and we read 34 through 39. Then we went to chapter 34, and we read verses 1 through 22. Then we jumped over into Ezekiel and read verses 1 through 3. And we're going to spend the majority of our time in Ezekiel. Actually, in Ezekiel chapter 2 is where we're going to spend all our time. We're not done with Jeremiah. We're going to come back to Jeremiah in about 7 or 8 days and finish Jeremiah up. But until then, we're going to be in Ezekiel for the next week. Ezekiel chapter 1 was awesome. This vision of this creature from God that's driven by the Spirit. And the description of this thing is incredible. So I hope you were able to read that. But we're going to jump into chapter 2 because to me that's where the law enforcement takeaway is. Ezekiel's calling here in chapter 2 is very similar to law enforcement's calling. It is not a law enforcement calling. God didn't say this is for law enforcement, but this mirrors, our calling mirrors what Ezekiel is called to in here. So just understand that this is not a law enforcement calling. I wouldn't say this is a law enforcement specific takeaway. But it mirrors our calling so much so that we can't help but look at it and see how see the comparisons between what Ezekiel is called to do and what we're called to do. So jumping right into it, chapter 2 verse 3 says that Ezekiel is being sent to a rebellious people, and these are God's people. These are the Hebrews. But God says they're stiff-necked. They've hardened their hearts. They're rebellious towards Him. They won't listen to Him. And God tells Ezekiel all this, and He says, "I'm sending you to these people, and they're not going to listen to you either. But I want you to go anyway and be obedient. Do what I tell you to do." We are sent into communities where our communities have rebellious people in them as well. Not everybody in our community is rebellious, but we have rebellious people. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a job. So, I mean, that's an interesting way to think and look at rebellion. Rebellion is sin, and without sin in this world, there would be no need for law enforcement. Chapter 2, verse 5. As for them, whether they listen or not, for they are a rebellious house, they will know that a prophet has been among them. So God says, I want you to go to them, speak to them. They're not going to listen, but I'm making a point here. They're going to know that a prophet has been sent. It's almost like He's setting it up for later on that they can't use the excuse, well, God, you never told us. And He can come back and say, yes, I did. I sent Ezekiel, and you wouldn't listen to him. And then in chapter 2, verse 6, it says, neither fear them nor fear their words. I love this message, especially for law enforcement. Let me not just say especially for law enforcement, especially for the law enforcement officers who are Christians who are called to minister to their communities. Especially for us. People aren't going to listen to us. They're not going to listen to law enforcement, but a lot of people aren't going to listen to Christian law enforcement especially. And I think that's the resentment towards that is building as time is starting to move forward, and we're starting to see a snowball effect of anti-law enforcement sentiment, anti-Christian sentiment. And when you put those two together, man, Christian law enforcement really, no one's going to listen to us. This message of the gospel will not always fall on peaceful people. We have to present the gospel as best we can to people who are in an attitude of peace. If they're already defensive and you try and share the gospel with them, chances are they're going to be even more defensive. So we need to look for people of peace to share the gospel with. 2 verse 6. Neither fear them nor fear their words. Did I just say that? Neither fear them nor fear their words? I think I did. They're going to reject us, but we are still called to share the gospel, still called to plant seeds. And I didn't make the note in here, but there's one place where God's talking about, Ezekiel, you're the warrior on the wall. You warn them of the danger to come, and if they don't listen to you, their blood's on their head. But if you don't warn them and disaster comes on them and you knew it was coming, their blood is on your hands. Again, this is not, God's not telling this to law enforcement. So I'm not telling you all the people of your community, their blood's on your hand because you didn't share the gospel with them. I'm not saying that. That's what God's telling Ezekiel here in this Old Testament passage, okay? But as law enforcement in today's culture and society, we still have a responsibility to share the gospel to people of peace when we get the opportunity. 2:7 says, "But you shall speak my words to them, whether they listen or not, for they are rebellious." Kind of sums up everything that God's telling Ezekiel here. And then in verse 8 it says, "Do not be like the rebellious." We cannot be rebellious. We're law enforcement officers. We're supposed to be above that. We're supposed to set the example and not be rebellious. We're supposed to be obedient, especially to the law, if we're talking about setting an example, but more so to God and what God has called us to. And if He's called us to share the gospel with law enforcement, by all means, let's be obedient to that. Look for opportunities. Pray that God would just make you accessible. And you don't have to share the gospel every time. God may send somebody to you that just wants to talk about spiritual things. And it may be a believer instead of a non-believer. So you're going to have to worry about winning them or evangelizing. But just make yourself available and ready to speak God's truths. Tomorrow we're in Ezekiel chapter 4-7. Read ahead. Come back here tomorrow. Ezekiel is a cool book. I think you're going to really enjoy it. And we'll see what kind of law enforcement takeaways we can find. So in the meantime, you guys be safe.